Oh, wasn't that wonderful? You guys can take your seats. Wow. Is there anyone else slightly out of breath? Is there anyone else who realized in that how rhythmically challenged they are? Is there anyone else like me? It's incredible, isn't it? An entire room can be going one way and I still want to go the other way. Like, I am definitely not the person to do the dancing or the singing or the clapping. So here I am, I'm going to do a bit of talking. We're going to take a few moments out in the middle of this to, I want to talk to you a little bit about this theme that we've put across tonight, this theme of joy. If we haven't met before, I'm Phil and I'm part of the team here, and it's so good to have you with us. We're so pumped that you chose to spend the evening with us so close to Christmas. But hopefully tonight we've communicated something of the joy of Christmas. What we've tried to do in the musical items and in what we've put together is give that sense of how the joy of Christmas kind of echoes around the world. There are all these different musical styles, different musical expressions, but this same sense of the joy of Christmas. But I want to ask tonight, why joy? What is it that prompts this joy? Where does this joy that we experience at Christmas time come from? Because there is something about Christmas that prompts this sense of joy, isn't there? For my day job, I'm a doctor. I'm a forensic neurodevelopmental psychiatrist, which is actually a lot less exciting than it sounds. Some of my colleagues are here and they will vouch for me being a lot less exciting than I sound. And you can ask them what a forensic neurodevelopmental psychiatrist is. But where we work is a secure unit. So we work with people who would otherwise be somewhere else in the criminal justice system. And I had this really interesting moment the other day, walking into the kind of day area of one of our units, and all of the patients were there, gathered around the dining table, coloring in Christmas pictures and listening to Christmas songs. It was just the most beautiful scene. It almost could have been like something out of a movie. Here was all these guys with their own different types of challenges, gathered together around this wonderful, warm moment, sitting with the staff, enjoying this sense of the joy of Christmas. It gave me this moment of recognizing that this joy of Christmas can break out in all sorts of different situations. And maybe you've experienced it. Maybe there's moments that you've experienced joy at Christmas, the like of which you haven't experienced at other times of the year. Maybe it's that opportunity that you have to see long-lost relatives or to catch up with your family, and only at Christmas time do you get together. Maybe it's the opportunity to go out and socialize with your colleagues. It's something that we definitely have to do at Christmas, isn't it? Like, even if you never see these people socially for the rest of the year, you have to have a Christmas party. Maybe it's the joy of an unexpected gift, of that time when your spouse finally got it right. I don't have this problem in our household because we have a list. My wife instituted a list. You stick to the list. The first year of marriage, I went off list, and I was reminded of the value of the list. Maybe you can think of times when you've experienced this unexpected joy at Christmas. I'm conscious too that the flip side is true. That there's actually something about Christmas that can bring into stark relief some of the challenges that we face. I think that Christmas kind of turns up the volume on the longings of the human heart. And it also turns up the volume on some of the problems in our society. I'm conscious too that for some people, Christmas can be a more difficult time because other people seem to be experiencing joy. That actually some of the challenges of our society, challenges of loneliness, those who are experiencing sickness, those who have experienced the death of a loved one, these things can be all the harder at this time of year. But why is it that we experience that? Why do we feel that pain so much more keenly at Christmas time? Well, I hope that we can answer a little bit about why we experience joy and why we miss it so much when it isn't there in the few minutes that we have together. But to answer that why question, I want to ask you another why question. I'm the kind of person who likes to ask why a lot, which either makes me fascinating company or really irritating, depending on what you think about the question why. But I want to ask you a question that came to my mind as I was reading through the Christmas account in preparation for tonight. Maybe you've asked this question, maybe you haven't. The question that I found myself asking was this: why shepherds? Why shepherds? You know, we've heard tonight from the book of Luke about how the angels appeared first to the shepherds, about how this gathering of shepherds were out there minding their own business in the fields, when all of a sudden the whole of heaven turned on the bright lights and appeared before them to tell them first about Jesus' birth. But why shepherds? I mean, why would they go to the shepherds first? If you were announcing the arrival of the Son of God, wouldn't you go to some kind of a religious leader? If you were telling people about a newborn king, wouldn't you find some kind of first century royal correspondent? Why shepherds? I mean, they're not known, I don't think, as messengers, are they? They weren't like the social media influencers of their day. It's not like everyone was like, oh, hashtag selfie with the shepherds. I know they didn't have phones back then. All right, for those of you who didn't laugh, it was just a joke. Why did they appear to the shepherds? Well, I think we can find a clue to the answer to this question if we go to what the angel first says to them. As it's recorded in Luke chapter 2, verse 10. It says, the angel said to them, do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. You see, shepherds were social outcasts. They spent their days out working in the fields, which meant they were kind of dirty and untidy and unkempt and smelly. And these things actually kind of made them outcasts in their society. More than that, it actually made them kind of ritually unclean from a Jewish perspective, which meant that they couldn't go and worship at the temple as others could, that there were certain areas of the temple that were denied to them. But here are a group of people who could not go where the rest of the people went to meet with God. And I think that this is what made them so perfect to be first recipients of this good news. Because the angel says this is good news of great joy to all people. All people. In choosing the shepherds first, God underlines the truth of those words. Here are those on the margins of society, outside of polite company, disconnected from traditional religious practices, unable to go and meet with God as the rest of the people could, and yet God chooses them to hear first about the birth of his son. God is announcing a new way of working, a new way of doing things, a new way of operating. He is announcing a way where anyone and everyone is welcome to hear the good news of Jesus. That anyone and everyone is welcome into relationship with him. That even in the moment of his birth, Jesus reaches out to those who are far from God and calls them home. This is a powerful message to any of us that have ever felt forgotten by God or far from him. To any of us who have ever wondered if God is out there or if he cares. Because here, through Jesus, God reaches out. Written large across the Christmas account, we see how God reaches out to those who seem or feel far from him, to include them in his story, to draw them near. The angels announce that their Savior, their Messiah, is born. They are describing a profound mystery as the Son of God comes into the world. God's own Son, born of flesh and blood. Jesus came to share our human experience. Set aside the majesty of heaven to walk alongside us. To understand our burdens, our challenges, our stresses, and our strains. He came to show us what a relationship with God could look like. But he also came to show us the way into that relationship. He came to open up the way for us to know God. And I think this is the second reason why the shepherds were chosen, because the shepherds knew a sacrifice when they saw it. As Pastor Tom, our lead pastor, shared last Sunday, the sheep that were raised on those hills, there is good evidence that they were the sheep that were used for the sacrifice in the temple. That actually, that just like Jesus, those sheep were laid in a manger to protect them from catching or picking up any imperfections, just like Jesus was. Because Jesus likewise came not only to live, but also to die. Jesus chose and fully embraced this purpose. That some 30 years after this, he would offer his life in our place, a sacrifice to take away our sin. And I know that sin can sound like a very religious word, but sin simply means the times that we have missed the mark. It is the times that we have fallen short of the goodness of God, the times that we have fallen short of the life that God would have for us. It is the weight of imperfection that should separate us from relationship with God. And regardless of how you feel about God or your concept of God tonight, you probably have that sense that sometimes in life all is not as it should be. But actually, Jesus came and lived a perfect, sinless life and willingly offered his life in our place to take away the stuff that should separate us from God. He was put to death on a cross, but did not stay dead. He rose to life 3 days later, opening up a new way, a way for each and every one of us to step into relationship with God. A relationship with God not based on what we are capable of, but based on what Jesus has already done. To fully explain this would take 100 messages like this, but put simply, through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, we find joy. As the weight of our missteps and mistakes is lifted off our shoulders, as we find forgiveness, as the hope and love and peace and purpose of God become a reality in our lives. There's the joy in that relationship with God being reestablished. As later writers made clear, giving us that opportunity was Jesus' great joy. I believe that is why joy so abounds at Christmas time. It is a reflection of the joy of God stepping into human history to reconnect with you and I. It is a reflection of all the fullness of a relationship with God, of all that we find when we reconnect with Him, and the joy of that moment has echoed from ages since. I think perhaps that's why we feel the lack of joy so keenly too. There are times when we feel so keenly what is wrong with the world. We become conscious that all is not as it should be. We feel life's imperfections and life's challenges all the more acutely. The darkness of our difficulty brought into stark contrast in the light of God's glorious light. But even in the struggle, we can still find Jesus. He draws near to us in our darkest moments, that He longs to be with us through the struggles, to replace the stress we feel with His unexpected peace. I know many people who have found an unexpected, irrational, inexplicable joy in the midst of difficulty when they have asked Jesus to walk with them through the trial. So what should we do in light of this? How should we live in light of this account? I think we find our first cue in the shepherds. It says that they went back praising God and glorifying God for all the things that they had heard and seen. You know, the shepherds did not stay silent about their experience, but they spoke joy into their world. Their response to seeing joy was to speak joy. And I think that in a world that is increasingly divided, increasingly negative, where criticism is often all we seem to see on social media or on the television, there is something incredibly powerful if we would be people who would speak joy. If we would speak joy into the lives of those around us, if we would speak joy on our social media, if we would speak joy in the way we speak to strangers and friends alike. And that might literally be to speak joy, to encourage people, to offer them a compliment, a word of encouragement, just to say something nice. But it might be also to speak joy through our actions, to put an arm around someone who's struggling, to invite in someone who's feeling lonely, to check in with our friends about how they are. I think that we can make a great difference in our world. It may seem straightforward, but it is significant if we just choose to bring a little joy into our day-to-day experience. And you know, even if we don't feel it, in fact, especially if you don't feel it, I want to encourage you to speak joy. Because I think that one of the best ways to spark joy in your own life is to speak joy into someone else's. That if we would speak joy, we will spark joy within us. That something will stir up inside of us. Because I think we can all agree that our world could use a little more joy. We crave it, we embrace it, we grab it with both hands when we experience it at Christmas time. But what if it didn't stay confined to December? What if we carried that joy into our world, into the rest of the months that we have together? Do you know, I think that if God can use a bunch of shepherds, then He can surely use us. If He can make a difference in the world through these social outcasts, this group of people out there gathered, huddled together on the hills, then surely He can use you and I to make a difference in our world. If we will be people who would speak joy, I think it might just change not only our experience, but the lives of those that we rub shoulders with every day. But there is another response to what we've heard today, one that is perhaps even more significant. Something that I'd like to give you an opportunity to do in just a moment. And that's to open up your life to God. I hope that doesn't sound weird or spooky, because I think it's so essential in response to what we've heard that I give you the opportunity to connect with God for yourself. That is, after all, why Jesus came. To open up the opportunity for each and every one of us to have a personal relationship with God. To break down the religious barriers, to get rid of the social construct that would separate us from God and make it possible for each and every one of us to step into a relationship with God for ourselves. That Jesus, through his death and resurrection, has cleared away the barrier of sin that should separate us from God and has opened up a new way for you and I to know God. You and I to know God regardless of our missteps and mistakes, regardless of our shortcomings, regardless of our sin, regardless of the stuff that we have done. That actually, regardless, no matter what you have done or even what you will do, you can know God. You can know the love of God. Peace that surpasses all understanding. A joy even in the darkest of situations. I don't know where you stand with God tonight. In a room with this many people, I couldn't hope to know where everyone stands as far as God is concerned. But I know for certain how God feels about you. I know that God loves you. I know that God values you. I know that God wants nothing more than to be a part of your life. And like I said, I know that nothing that you have ever done nor will ever do needs to separate you from a relationship with God. Not because of what you can do, because of what Jesus has already done. So I want to give you the opportunity tonight to connect with Jesus. The opportunity tonight to start a relationship with God. And I can guarantee that you will have questions about that. But I think you'll probably have questions on the other side of this decision too. The difference is that you can start to answer those questions knowing that God has come into your life. So I want to give you the opportunity tonight to connect with Jesus, the opportunity to start a relationship with God, the opportunity to walk out of those doors knowing that God has come into your life. And to give you a moment of focus, a moment to consider your response, I'd like everyone in this place just to close your eyes and bow your heads. Just so that you can focus, just so that you can consider your response. Because it isn't about the people that you came with or the people that invited you or your friends or family. This is about you. This is your moment. This is your opportunity to connect with Jesus. This is your opportunity to start a relationship with God, to find forgiveness for your past, new hope for today, fresh purpose, peace for the future in relationship with God, fresh joy. What we're going to do in a moment is we're going to pray a prayer. Pray that prayer all together. I will lead us through that prayer, but I would love to know tonight who I have the privilege of praying with, who wants to make that decision tonight to connect with Jesus. And so I know who that I'm praying with, so I know who is making that response, I'm going to ask you to lift up your hand if that's you. If you want to connect with Jesus tonight, if you want to start a relationship with God, would you lift up your hand for me?